All right. Welcome, everybody. Looks like we've got a lot of attendees coming through. So just want to give it a second for some folks to join us and welcome you all to our webinar. All right, should we get started? Looks like we've got some good critical mass here. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our webinar today on employee ownership, brought to you by the Employee Ownership Catalyst Fund. I'm Celine Suarez, and I am a Managing Director in the Global Sustainable Finance Group at Morgan Stanley, and I'm also the Head of Corporate Sustainability and Reporting for our firm. Welcome to our webinar today. I'm not sure who's flipping the slides, but there I am. Hello, that's me. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. We have a wonderful group of panelists for you. In addition to my role at Morgan Stanley, I'm also on the board of Living Cities, and Living Cities is an investor in the Catalyst Fund. So we're very excited to talk about this today with all of you. So very quickly, I'm just going to give a couple of brief remarks and turn it over to our first presenter today. But I thought it was important to just sort of set the scene a little bit on employee ownership and, why, why is employee ownership important? Why is it relevant? And at the end of the day, employee ownership is exactly that. It is when employees own shares in a company. And, in my world, in the world of sort of global finance and working for a large firm, the context of employee ownership that I see in my work is a lot about aligning the incentives of the firm and leaders of the firm and management of the firm with the objectives of our public shareholders, right? So when we are granting shares to employees in a big firm like ours, the idea is that it's part of an employee's reward, and it is a sign that that particular employee or leader of the firm has really demonstrated that kind of firm level thinking and has a reason for their role to be really aligned at the core with the firm strategy and the objectives of our investors. And I think a lot of us in sort of the large financial services market see this as an important alignment of company priorities and firm leadership priorities. But in the context of today's discussion, I'm actually going to learn a lot today too about employee ownership as far as the work of this fund and project equity. And I spent a lot of my career developing corporate sustainability strategies, which includes sort of what you would expect from a large financial services institution like Morgan Stanley. A lot of my work is around driving our engagement with investors and stakeholders on, our reporting and transparency around environmental and social issues. I'm a very, sort of passionate professional about the issues of climate change and human rights, and these are very sort of core to the work I do at Morgan Stanley in thinking about how is our firm really kind of showing up on these issues and not only doing the right thing, but aligning our action on important systemic, social, and environmental issues with our strategy as a firm. And I've learned a lot about employee ownership through my initial conversations with the team that we'll be hearing from today. But really, at the end of the day, I think it's an important model for employee engagement, for financial security for employees, and for really, as I talked about already, sort of incentivizing and aligning the priorities and values of the company and the workforce. So today's discussion is really to introduce this audience to employee ownership and the ways in which business owners can get access to capital and resources when selling their businesses to their employees. We will discuss at length the environment that we're living in today. Obviously, we all know it's a very dynamic, complex, changing environment on pretty much every topic. And I think it's really important at this particular moment in our history to be thinking about how, business owners that have started successful, small, medium, large businesses and sort of grown them over time and are looking at succession to really think about how to do that in a time where it's really difficult to do so, to ensure that this, business or firm that you've developed from the ground up, maybe in the basement or the garage or with your friends or family, that it continues to sort of live on and have the legacy that a founding owner is really sort of committed to from the get-go. So I think it's important too that we'll be hearing from some business owners who have transitioned to an employee ownership model and how and why that's made the future of their companies a lot brighter. So I think it's important for us to introduce this model to you and to sort of think about how business owners really depend on their advisors and other business owners in the ecosystem that they engage with so that they can understand what options lay ahead of them. And so my view is that today, after this discussion, you all will have a great understanding of employee ownership and how to think about it and whether or not it's something to consider for you. So before I introduce our panelists, I'm just going to touch on a couple of housekeeping items. So first of all, the hardest part is you've all made it here to the Zoom platform, so thank you for joining us virtually. Throughout this presentation, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our panel, please use the Q&A function. So if you look, if you're on a desktop computer, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A button. You can enter in your questions there, and we'll be looking to take audience questions in the last sort of 10 to 15 minutes. We're only here for an hour, so please feel free to pop your questions in there as they come up. You don't have to wait till the end to sort of scramble to that Q&A function. Add your questions in. We'll be taking note of them as we go, and we'll get to them towards the end. And secondly, we are recording this seminar. So for anyone who signed up to this session today, or if you think anyone else in your network would be interested in it, there will be a recording for you to pass along to share with others. So I think there's a lot of important information and ability to gain access to some great resources in this discussion ahead. So please share it for others who can't make it. So with that, I am going to introduce our panelists. Here we are, all of our panelists. So first, we will hear from Allison Lingane, who is the co-founder at Project Equity and managing director of the Employee Ownership Catalyst Fund. We also have Sam Brownell, managing director at Stratus Wealth Advisors, which is in Maryland. Rick Plimpton, who is the CEO of Optimax, an employee-owned precision optics manufacturer located in New York. And we'll also hear from Jason Sharp, who is the CEO of Namaste Solar, an employee-owned solar company that's located in Colorado. So very excited to talk to you all in a little bit, but first I'm going to turn it over to Allison from Project Equity, and she's going to set the scene for us today by talking us through today's business environment and introducing us all to the topic of employee ownership and its benefits. So with that, I'm not going to say any more. Allison, over to you.
Thank you so much, Celine. And thank you everyone who has joined us today for taking the time out of your schedules. So Celine mentioned I'm Allison Lingane, co-founder of Project Equity, and we are a national nonprofit dedicated really to increasing awareness and uptake of broad-based employee ownership as an important strategy to support small businesses and workers and build resilient economies. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through some stage setting about the realities of the current business environment that are most relevant to why employee ownership matters. So I certainly do not have to tell you that COVID has created significant challenges for small businesses, especially in certain sectors. So we've all lived and breathed this since March of last year, 2020, and hopefully in your communities, you're seeing businesses come back from this, though likely, as I mentioned, some sectors are still not faring as well as others. What many are not aware of is that COVID-19 hit when we already had millions of businesses at risk as a result of the baby boomer retirement wave, which is dubbed the Silver Tsunami. So I'll explain a bit more about that in a second, but next slide. So we know that hiring and retaining employees is a huge challenge right now. 3% of the entire workforce quit their jobs in August. This is just shy of 1 in 30 people quitting in 1 month alone. And half of small businesses have unfilled jobs. So this is an extremely challenging reality that small businesses face coming out of the pandemic, and it's costly. Next slide. Employee ownership has increased, employee turnover has increased in the last 3 years. Replacing a worker who leaves can cost as much as a third of their annual pay. And yet, 94% of employees say they'd stay at their current employer if they invested in their professional development. So just sit with that for a second and remember that theme. I'm going to switch gears back to the other major small business crisis, the Silver Tsunami. So turns out that retirement age business owners own 1 out of every 2 job creating businesses. 1 out of every 2 job creating businesses. Our baby boomer generation owns an estimated 2.9 million small businesses, employing over 32 million workers, which is about 1 in 6 private sector workers. So with this many businesses needing to find buyers as these business owners, march towards retirement, it really is not a great market for the selling business owner. Next slide. Kids are not taking over the family businesses anymore. Only about 15% transition within families, and only about 20% of companies put on the market find a buyer. So for business owners that are nearing retirement age, the call to action is twofold. Start now with succession planning. Don't put it off. It needs your attention. And the second call to action is look at your range of options and take some time to consider one you might not have considered otherwise, which is employee ownership. Next slide. So for business owners thinking about their options for retirement, we often recommend that they put themselves 5 years after they have transitioned and look back. What is it that you want to see? Legacy is usually top of the list. The company that represents my life's work and might have my name on the door is still doing well. It's respected in the community. It's serving customers, employees, and partners. And my employees who helped me build the business are also doing well. They have successfully shepherded the company into its next chapter. Of course, it's important that I have what I need to retire financially. Getting market value for the company is critical. So as you can see, employee ownership checks these boxes. It really delivers on all of these fronts. Okay, so what do we mean when we say employee ownership? Employee ownership is an arrangement in which employees participate in the ownership of a company, either through share in full, so it can be 100% of the company owned by the employees, or partial, just a portion, 30% of the company, for example. It can be a way for an owner to sell their business at market rate while helping employees build wealth through an ownership stake. In addition, it can reduce staff turnover, increase financial stability. In other words, it can be a way to strengthen the underlying business at the same time. So the topic of today's seminar is recruit, retain, reward, retire. So we've talked about the importance of finding a succession plan, but the importance of employee ownership for recruiting, retaining, and rewarding employees can also not be understated. In a survey that we did with our partner, Hadaway Communications, this past summer, we found that small business owners value the business benefits of an employee ownership transition. Over 70% of business owners surveyed, we did a survey of 400 small business owners, over 70% of them responded that each of the 4 things on this slide was somewhat or extremely important. So employee ownership helps me increase profitability, helps me motivate employees, receive fair value, and it also helps me give my business the capital to grow, more profit, more ability to plow that back into the business. So just think about what, as a small business owner, matters most to you in terms of business outcomes and the ways that employee ownership can help. So I'm going to whiz through some data slides here just to show the backdrop of the many ways that employee ownership has been shown through analysis to support strong business outcomes. So better business outcomes, more profit, as I mentioned, to reinvest for growth. A couple of stats here from some wonderful peer organizations in our space. Better wages. Next slide, please. So employee-owned businesses offer better wages, which makes it easier to recruit. Happier employees means higher retention. Next slide. Fewer layoffs also means happier employees and higher retention. And in the thick of COVID-19, there was a survey done last summer, summer 2020, found that employee-owned companies retain jobs at a 4-to-1 rate compared to non-employee-owned firms. So overall, these stats are telling us better from the employee's perspective, which drives right into retention, job satisfaction, and the ability to hire. So from the business owner's perspective, who's looking at a succession plan, employee buyouts have some unique benefits. We've already mentioned owners achieve a market price for their business. But in addition to that, employee ownership transitions offer the ability to craft your exit timeline, to really be in charge of what that looks like and manage it, over a period of years in the way that fits for what you need and what your business needs. And of course, it preserves the company's legacy, culture, people, and other assets. Okay, so when we say employee ownership, what do we mean? It means that ownership is available to the broad base of employees, and there is more than one way to do it. So these are the 3 major forms of broad-based employee ownership. On the left here, we have employee stock ownership plans, the shorthand for which is ESOPs. This is perhaps the most well-known. ESOPs function or set up similarly to a 401k retirement plan, but the asset is a part or all of a company's shares that are transferred into a trust held for and on behalf of the employees. Some important criteria to know for ESOPs is that if you're about 40 employees or up, you're big enough to consider this option. The other forms of employee ownership have a threshold more about 10 employees. ESOPs also come with some important tax relief benefits, both for the business and the selling owner. And due to those tax relief benefits, they can be more costly to set up and maintain, which is what drives that minimum size threshold. ESOPs are free to employees, and they can have governance by employees built into the model. The second form, and we're going to hear from Namaste Solar today, that is set up as a worker co-op, is a worker co-op. These are 100% employee owned. They have lower setup costs, and they have democratic principles and profit sharing built right into the model. Employee owners elect and sit on the board, and they are less expensive to set up. They do have tax advantage. Employees have an equitable stake. You can think of worker co-ops really as universal and a fit for companies of all sectors. Then the third is an EOT, and we're going to hear from Optimax today, which is structured as an employee ownership trust. And this is a trust structure that exists to protect the business in perpetuity and for the benefit of the employees. The EOT is very customizable and flexible. Employees are beneficiaries of the trust, and it is perpetual, so the business can't be sold. It does have few, if any, tax advantages, but it is free for the employees and has built-in profit sharing. So we're excited to hear from our panelists to learn more about the different models. And then just on the next slide, as a summary here, when businesses ask us, well, how do I know if I could be a fit? At Project Equity, we do a lot of one-on-one consults with business owners, and we talk about the readiness factors and different forms of employee ownership and the path to assess this for your business. But sort of the key readiness factors are that the company must be profitable, taking COVID into account, of course, because without a profitable business, there isn't an asset really to sell, right? However, if you're a company that's earlier in your stage of growth and you're really looking at employee ownership as a way to increase engagement, in order to build the company to profitability, there can be a way to transfer some ownership without it needing to be a sale. But for most businesses, especially for those that retire, business owners are retiring age, a profitable business, as I mentioned, 10 or more employees. If you're looking at an ESOP, 40 or more is the rough threshold. And it is transitions to employee ownership are best for established companies with years of experience. So I will leave it at that in terms of the introduction, because we're really eager to get into the meat of the conversation today with our panelists. So I will stop here and pass it back to Celine.
Thanks, Allison. And actually, Allison, before I let you go, I'm going to ask you one question. I understand there's a new fund for businesses to gain access to financing for an employee ownership transition. Would you mind just spending a moment telling us about that?
Sure. Yeah, I would be happy to. So the Employee Ownership Catalyst Fund is a fund that Project Equity just launched timed with Labor Day. And I really want to give a big shout out to Living Cities and extend our gratitude, to you, Celine, and to the others involved. As Celine mentioned, she's on the board of Living Cities. Because Living Cities, is one of the investors in the Catalyst Fund, and it is a collaboration of some of the world's largest foundations and financial institutions addressing racial income and wealth gaps in American cities. So the reason that we launched this fund is really with a goal of bringing highly flexible capital to businesses that want to pursue employee ownership. Whether the need for capital is during the time period of working towards an employee ownership transition, for example, to cover the costs of lawyers to do the setup, or for working capital support the business health in order to make that transition strong, and also for that transaction financing. So, in almost all cases, we are talking employee ownership is a sale of some or all of the business. And so it requires financing. So the Catalyst Fund supports businesses doing either 100% employee ownership transitions or partial, for example, 30% transition, and all forms of broad-based employee ownership. And we'd be happy to talk more about it in the Q&A, or if anyone's interested in learning more specifically, don't hesitate to reach out to Project Equity directly.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I thought it was a good point to mention it. So love to talk about talk to the panel now. Thank you for the magic slide advancement forward and backward. We are back where we need to be. So first, I'm going to just ask you, Jason, would you just take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience?
Great. Yeah, thank you. It's awesome to be here. I love these conversations. I love employee ownership. My name's Jason Sharp. I joined Namaste Solar in 2006. We were founded in 2005 with 3 original founders, and actually transitioned to our current structure in 2011, but sort of had the seeds of employee ownership really from the beginning. And the thing you said about succession planning really resonated for me. We actually paid off our original investors last year, 15 years after inception. So that whole idea of it takes time and planned succession planning. I think employee ownership's amazing the earlier you start, and it does take a while to liquidate the capital, at least in our structure and the way that we approached it. But exciting that we've transitioned, and the first succession of the original founders and CEO has happened, and we're sort of in the next generation, and that's exciting.
Great. Can we have the next slide, please? Super. Rick, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm CEO at Optimax, where we manufacture precision optics for research and industry. So just to give you an idea, we're a key supplier to NASA, and we've made optics for each of the Mars rovers that's up there exploring the planet. We were founded in 1991, run as a for-profit business. During those years, between 91 and 2020, we were either a C Corp or an S Corp, depending on which part of the growth we were in. But in 2020, we converted to an employee ownership trust. It took us a good 5 years of researching, doing our succession planning, and before we settled on what was going to work for us. We were looking for a solution that at least gave the potentials for 100 years of prosperity. We think that the employee ownership trust does that. And we wanted to make sure that the company would never be sold and that profits would always be shared with our employees. For 25 years, we've been sharing profits with our employees each month. We run the company open book. We show our revenues, our expenses, how much profit we made, and then we take 25% of the profit and give it to the employees. And that's part of our recipe for success, and we want to make sure that continues. I first met Allison at the Espen Institute. She and I are both members of a fellowship for job quality. And so it's great to see you again, Allison, and thanks for inviting me to be here today.
Great. And Sam, over to you for an intro.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thanks again to the folks at Project Equity for having us here. Our firm focuses on independent business owners, and we do succession planning. So from the valuation to the thinking through the options to how does that tie in with an owner's personal planning, and how does that tie in with the workers, their legacy. So all the stuff we're talking about here. And just wanted to touch on a couple points everybody said. Number one, start early. Start early and know your options. Really, really important, because what we find is that a lot of businesses business owners get stuck on what we would consider the traditional. Well, my kids definitely don't want the business. A lot of times they don't even ask, but they just assume that they don't want the business. So I'm going to have to sell it. And so selling the business is really emotional. And as Allison talked through, it's unclear what the result is when you sell the business, but they've gotten themselves so focused on, I need to sell the business, that they then start getting into the spin cycle. And I was just talking to a client earlier this week of, oh my goodness, what do I do? You know, are they going to take care of my employees? Am I going to have to turn over the keys on day one? All of these things become really, really critical emotional issues that can be resolved if they just took a step back and said, hey, there are other options here. You know, even if I like the guy across town, do I really want him to sell my business? Does he really understand it as well as my employees? So just trying to get people to think earlier about what their options are becomes really, really important.
Great. Well, thank you for all of those thoughtful introductions. I think those were great sort of tee-ups to the conversation. And I wanted to start with Jason and Rick. And you both sort of briefly mentioned this, but if you could go a little bit deeper than your introduction sort of started with on, you know, talk to us about your motivations to become employee owned and some of the specific benefits that I would say first that you were seeking in the exploration phase, if you will, and then what benefits have you actually seen come to life since you've converted to an employee owned model? And in particular, I'd be very interested in what were some of the surprises that you didn't expect to see or learn that were outcomes? So why don't we start with you, Rick, and then we'll go to Jason.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so let's take it back a little bit. So in the early years of Optimax, I joined Optimax in '95 when I was 10 people struggling to make weekly payroll. And as we grew the business, you know, as a young professional, I just thought everybody wanted to have equity. And so I really looked seriously at ESOP and going down that path. But every time we surveyed our workforce, you know, would you prefer a share of stock or share the bonus, you know, share the profits? And they always said, give us the cash. So I started looking more seriously for a solution that had allowed us to continue to share profits with the employees. We have a culture of open book management. It's self-led. It's a very, you know, to be successful in our culture, you have to have you have to be a self-starter. You know, if you're waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do, you're probably going to get pushed out. But it's a culture where it doesn't fit with a lot of organizations, bigger organizations in particular, where it's about command and control. So this is one of the things that we wanted to be able to preserve, was not only the sharing the wealth with our employees, but also maintaining the culture that we had developed that's rather unique. So those are two of the big things for us, and just the, you know, the possibility that this could carry on for decades and decades and continue to create prosperity and jobs, create financial security for families here in our community. This is something I like to share with local politicians. In the first 30 years of Optimax, we generated $500 million in revenue. Roughly half of that was shared with our employees. So $250 million was shared with our employees through payroll, benefits, and bonuses. In the next 30 years, Optimax will generate over $5 billion in revenue if we stay on the path we're on. And about half of that will be shared with our employees. So $2.5 billion. That's how you provide financial security for your employees and strengthen your community. So that's what we're working on. That's what we're hoping for.
Great. Jason?
That's awesome, Rick. It's interesting. There's a lot of similarities in our experience to what you just shared, and I think transparency. So we're open book too, and I think when you think of the difference between an employee and an owner, owners have risk, owners have reward. That's different than just punching the clock and making a paycheck. And owners have information. Right. And they use that information to make decisions. And so we wanted to create more engagement, and we wanted people to feel the risks and opportunities of business. And when you actually feel those risks and opportunities, you're much more engaged. You're much more worried about billable hours, or you're much more worried about customer experience, or you're much more worried about optimizing your time at work that week. And people make up stories, so if people don't know how profitable a business is, they make up a story about how profitable it is, and they see the marketing, they make up their story about how the people at the top are taking more, and that how they should make more, and they're going to go get theirs, somewhere else, is part of that story. But when you're really honest and you show people cause and effect of business ownership, it changes the culture, and people are much more bought into what the business needs to do. And when people know why decisions are being made, and if you can even give them the opportunity to influence that decision, to make people feel heard and listened to in decisions, it's such a powerful benefit to the organization. So that's really been part of our experience. So we wanted to create the ownership experience for everybody. We call it the Namaste MBA. We joke because we go over the balance sheet, we show people P&L, and we talk about how they can help optimize profitability. We share profits the same way. We share annually, and we're a dividend paying investment. So we just share the annual profit, because the people who worked that year, my dad used to say, profit is unpaid wages. And so at the end of the year, we share the profit amongst all the owners in that year. So we don't build up equity that gets cashed out at the end. We're pay as you go, and we're sharing the profits along the way. And there's that cause and effect experience of seeing the information and action that can create more profit for the organization. So it sounds similar. It's just a different structure.
That's great. And yeah, I mean, especially coming from a big firm, I think it is often hard for the average employee to sort of feel that connection and relationship to how the firm runs, how it works, what the risks are, what the tensions are, what the challenges are. And that level of transparency just does seem really empowering to employees. So I think that's a wonderful outcome. And while we're talking to Jason and Rick, I also just wanted to ask you both to briefly describe the different models that you're each using, because, I think there's a little bit of nuance there. It sounds like you guys are on similar paths, but with some differences. So maybe, Jason, we'll start with you this time. And if you could just sort of walk us through the structure and sort of how it works on a very practical level, that'd be great.
Yeah, great. So in 2011, we transitioned to our current model of employee ownership. And one of the big things was in that transition, what was the sale price of the company? And basically, we came up with a strike price, converted and paid off the original investors for the value of the company at the time we transitioned. And now every owner, it's the same fixed price for a share. So it's a $5,000 share. Anyone can petition for ownership, but we have a 1-year candidacy where people go through a mentorship program. They learn about the business, they learn about ownership. They're assigned a mentor who kind of stewards them through learning how to be an owner of the company. Right now, we're a little over 200 people, and we're a little over 100 owners. We've grown quite a bit this last year. There's always some people who opt not to be owners for various reasons. We would love to get that ownership percentage up higher, I think, but we've been at about 50% for the last couple of years. And then on really important decisions, like selling the company, for example, might be the most important decision. Then everybody gets one vote. So me as the CEO, I get one vote, and everyone else that's an owner gets one vote, and majority rules in those decision making. Day to day, we run like a pretty normal business, like we have an org structure and roles and responsibilities, but governance, everybody has the same number of votes. We have a 7-person board. 4 of those seats are internal. The board oversees the CEO, hires, fires, performance review, et cetera. The board also has fiduciary obligations to different stakeholders. So that board is the oversight, and it's sort of a circular accountability mechanism where the CEO oversees the employees vote for the board oversees the CEO. So you get sort of a circular accountability mechanism to hold everybody accountable and act in good faith for the best of the cooperative. So those are the high level thoughts. I'm sure there's more there, but that's a quick overview. Oh, and I said 200 people, right? Yeah, 200 people, 100 owners. Yep.
Great. Yeah. So Rick, what's similar? What's different?
Yeah, so with an employee ownership trust, we're about 400 employees with essentially 0 owners going forward. Through the years, we had early investors and shareholders that have all been bought out except me and my business partner. And he and I are gifting a block of shares to the EOT and selling the rest of our shares back to the company. So the shares we sell to the company, those all get retired. So going forward, only the shares in the EOT are the voting shares. And the board of trustees is made up of me and my business partner, and then a third trustee, which is voted into that seat by the board of directors at Optimax. So the board of directors at Optimax is actually the body that operates the business. What we have is an employee ownership trust that owns Optimax, and Optimax operates as a for-profit business underneath it. So the third seat in the trust is a seat where someone from the board of directors of Optimax is there to represent the interests of the employees. And we thought that was a really important seat to have there in perpetuity. And then there is a trust protector, which is an EOT attorney that we work with, and a trust administrator, because our trust is established in the state of Delaware. The board of directors is a maximum of 10 people, and that's the body that actually operates the business. So that's, very simply, that's how we're operating, where it's a little bit misleading to call it an employee ownership structure, because what we're actually doing is sharing profits with employees as we go and ensuring that the company will never be sold.
That's super interesting. So actually, Sam, I think it's a good time to turn to you, because now that we've sort of heard about some real world examples and some different, models, I was wondering if you could go a little bit deeper. You touched on some of this in your intro, but tell us more about what you see as the options that business owners have today. What are some of the common, questions and concerns that you hear from business owners when they're thinking about, transferring their business to a different model? And what are some of the classic obstacles that you see they face?
Yeah, sure. All good questions. So take it from the top in terms of what's out there. They're sort of the more traditional, what you would think of. You sell to a family member. Maybe there's a key employee or key employees who, part of your management team that might want to take over the business. That typically requires that they either have a lot of wealth themselves, or they're able to go out and borrow quite a bit of money. And so for a lot of businesses, that's just out of reach, right? A business, even if a business is, maybe running 8 or 10 million a year and worth 2 or 3 million, that's still a lot to ask for somebody to come up with, and then pay off over time. So, in that type of structure, you would have to set it up so that there's a down payment and then there's a certain payoff over time that wouldn't just crush the business in terms of the cash flow they're getting. So that can work. It's challenging in terms of the monetary piece, but also, as Allison pointed out earlier, there aren't as many kids, and especially because a lot of the businesses we work with tend to be in smaller communities. A lot of the owners' kids now, they go to college, they go off another place, and they're not really sure they want to come home. So that can be very challenging. The other one is strategic acquisition, right? Is there somebody in the industry that thinks that we would be a good fit, whether they want to expand to this location or we have very similar cultures? that can be a good option for some folks, but I think that that's where people get caught up is, okay, and I'll give you an example. I was just talking to a client a couple of weeks ago who went to okay, geez, my kids don't want the business. I can't, nobody can match our culture. And I don't know, maybe I should just close down and sell off all the inventory. And so it's easy for people to jump and get really emotional. And Rick talked about it earlier about culture. That's a huge part of an owner, and many good business owners, they think about two things before they think of themselves. They think of their employees and they think of the culture of the business. And it's very difficult to have somebody come in from the outside and truly be able to understand what's going on in a business that has been built over the last 30, 40 years. So it's an option for some people, and sometimes the right buyer is out there, and it's something to consider, but it doesn't check as many boxes usually. And it can be kind of a knee-jerk reaction sometimes. And the other thing I'd throw in there is everyone's, now in particular, there's a lot of private equity money going on around out there. So there are a lot of these financial roll-ups where, private equity or private equity backed company will think, okay, this industry is doing well. We're going to put together a lot of these businesses into one company and then try to sell it off or go public or something like that. And that, in my mind, is oftentimes the worst of all, because they're concerned with their own exit, not with your business. And so then that leaves you with, and again, starting early, exploring the employee ownership, because that hits on a lot of the culture issue that Rick brought up, Jason had brought up, making sure that your employees are engaged. And this is something that I was just in Boston a couple of weeks ago at a conference for lumber and building material dealers. And one of the big challenges they're having is, how do we attract and retain younger, talented workers? And I think what Jason was talking about hits right at that, which is give them something to be involved in, right? Make them feel part of something, as opposed to, I show up at work, I drive a forklift, I check the box, but where am I going? And so I think that that's really key when you start talking about these ownership transfers. Is it's not just about the exiting owner. It's about, from an employee's perspective, what's the buy-in? Why am I here? What is the point of me being part of this company? What is it doing for both for me, for the community, and for the world as a whole? And I think people are thinking more holistically like that, and kind of this tunnel vision of, I'm going to work for 40 years and get my W-2 wages. It's different, and especially in the small business community. So that's kind of the setup of what's out there. And then, like I said, the obstacles, especially from exiting owners, tend to be emotional. I don't think a lot of people consider how much they care about their business until they have to consider selling, especially to somebody that maybe is not either part of the family or internally employee. But it's a lot of, can somebody do the job I was doing? Nobody's going to do it like I'm going to do it, and all these things. And working through those obstacles, I would say that 25% of what I do is financial. The rest is psychology.
Yep. I can completely understand that. And I guess, I just wanted to sort of circle back on the theme of this discussion too with you, Sam. This webinar is titled Recruit, Retain, Reward, Retire. Those are all very employee and sort of talent focused words. So could you just tell us a little bit more about, situations, maybe some concrete examples in which you would actually recommend the route of employee ownership, and what are the signposts that a business owner should look for to understand whether this is something for them to explore?
Yeah, so great question. And so starting at the top, which a lot of times is on most owners' minds, first, it's their employees. Is whoever's taking over the business going to take care of my employees? If that's something that you're concerned about, this is absolutely 100% something that you should be thinking about, because nobody is going to take care of your people better than your people. It's a fact. It's not going to happen. And you could find the best strategic buyer for your business, and they may come in and they say, we're going to leave the management team in place. We like what you guys are doing. But at a certain point, It comes down to the financial numbers. Are you growing the way they thought you were going to grow when they went to make an offer? And if not, maybe that comes out of what they're paying to the owner. Maybe that comes in the form of, well, we're going to downsize, or, we have to get rid of this division. And so, that's key. And so if you care about your employees, definitely. Number two is price. The best thing about an employee ownership is it creates a ready market for your shares as the business owner. Regardless of how your entity is structured, whether you're a C corporation, an S corporation, an LLC, taxed as whatever corporation or pastor entity you want, it doesn't really matter. But the biggest thing for the retirement piece for the owner is, how am I going to monetize this illiquid asset? And you have to figure out, where are there shares, where there's a market for my shares. And if that's a question you have, then again, think about the employee ownership model, because we're not asking your employees to come up with $5 million to buy you out on the spot, right? And we're not saying you have to turn over 100%. And that kind of gets into the third piece of this, which is, the owner lots of times doesn't want to sell the business on Friday and then go to the golf course on Monday. That's just not the way that people are wired, especially now. And so then we have to start looking at, and Allison mentioned it, what is the owner, what do you want? What is your transition plan? And to give an example, I was talking to a business owner in the Midwest. He owns a lumber and hardware business. And his big thing was, I don't like to fish. I don't like to play golf. I'd like to add another location to the store, but I'm not really sure that I want to do it just by myself. Okay. Here's a perfect opportunity. Get your people involved, and let's go do something where you don't have to turn over the keys day one. You can still be involved. And then I think finally, mentorship, right? If as an owner, you really like to teach your employees and you want them to succeed, employee owner, there's no better way to do it, in my opinion, because you have that opportunity to bring them along while you are still involved and can give all that knowledge that you've gained over all the years that you've been running the business.
Yeah. And I see head nodding from you, Jason. I'm coming to you next. Don't you worry. Yeah. Do you want to comment on that before I go a little deeper? I have a follow-up. But go ahead.
Is that okay?
Go. Yeah.
I think so often in business, we have this mentality of win-lose, right? And the more I win, then somebody else has to lose in order for that to happen. And I think employee ownership's win-win, and it's that both the exiting owner and the employees both are winners in this game. And I think that too many times people get in that mindset of, how do I maximize my exit? And if we start adding these other things into the equation, you can actually find win-win solutions. And you have a key person, like we're talking about the retention, right? And we're talking about the great resignation. And if you have key people in your organization, what's your organization's value if those people leave? And if they're like knowing that you're going to sell, and you end up in this game of chicken, right? And sometimes in partnerships, like one of the reasons we converted is that owners couldn't get out. They felt trapped. And they're like, geez, if these key people leave, I'm the one with all of the risk. So I have all the risk, and I'm going to keep all the reward, but I'm also going to keep all the risk. And now I'm the one with the golden handcuffs who can't leave. How do I transition? How do I get my key people invested in this organization so that I have more flexibility and less risk? And I think that employee ownership flips the model to win-win. It takes some time, but the mentorship, like the founding CEO is still part of Namaste Solar and is one of my greatest mentors. And he's only involved 8 to 16 hours a week at most, and some weeks less. But what an amazing mentor, for him to stay part of the business over that period. So just an exciting win-win opportunity to go down this route.
Hi, Celine. I just want to let you know, we've got a lot of great questions that have been coming in. We've got 10 minutes left. I've sent you some over a chat, if you don't mind checking out your chat and focusing some of the questions to our panelists. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I do want to get to a couple of them. In particular, one that I thought was a great question too, which is where can employees get information on employee ownership, I know there's a lot, we've talked really a lot today to, I think, an owner audience, but with employees being so at the heart of this, where can employees get up to speed a little bit more?
So I'll take a stab at that. So there's quite a bit of information on the internet these days that you can find. But a really great place to get more information is the National Conference for Employee Ownership. If you can get either attend that conference or get connected with somebody that's in that organization, they've got a lot of great information available. Much of what they do is about ESOPs, but they also they're starting to gather more and more information about co-ops and EOTs.
Yeah, and I would add to that don't be afraid to reach out to Project Equity, to myself, to Jason or Rick. People in the employee ownership space are happy to talk, and they're happy to put folks in touch with referrals, with references. It's a community that likes to share. So don't be afraid to reach out and use your resources.
Great. Well, with that, I wanted to pose a question to you, Rick. I saw that you unmuted, so you might want to add, I don't know if you're adding to that comment as well, so you can do that. But we'd love to hear whether the EOT conversion needed any special negotiation or clarification with respect to your government contracts.
Okay, so yeah, first I just want to say that with EOTs, you can make a perpetual purpose trust, and it can the exiting owner really has a lot of flexibility in how they define that. So toward your question. Yeah, one of the unexpected benefits of creating a succession plan like we have is that our largest customers at first were like, "What are you doing? This is really strange. Come here, we need to talk about this." And so as I talked to them and I shared with them, what our long-term plan was, what the succession plan was, they became more comfortable with it. And in fact, we've created a situation where they no longer have to worry about their supply chain being compromised because we get acquired, a few years down the road. So many of our best customers are doubling down on their relationship with Optimax and looking forward to further investment and development on new technologies or innovations that'll help satisfy their strategic plans.
Great. Another question we've received is about the timeline. So I've heard some casual references to, it takes some time and you got to put some thought into it and do some homework. Could somebody walk us through whether it's, Jason or Rick from the practitioner, like we actually did this side, or Sam from the how you would advise your client's side? I will sort of let whoever unmutes first go first, but how does the timeline work? And do you find that there's a certain level of just kind of getting up to speed and comfort level before the actual real timeline of transitioning starts? So kind of what's the lead and learning time? And then from sort of day one, okay, we've decided to pull the trigger to we've restructured. Could you give us a sense of how long that takes?
Sure. So I'll jump in there and to give a little bit of background. From our perspective, the short answer to your question is at least 3 years, and that's probably on the short end, depending on what you want to do. But generally what we counsel folks is, number one, get educated, right? Know what the options are out there. Think about them in terms of your workforce, your company, what you want as your legacy. And that can be a period of a couple of years. And that's why it's really important to start early, because I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman actually in upstate New York who transferred his business to worker-owned cooperative, and I met him at an association conference probably earlier this year. But anyways, it took him 3 years of research just to settle on which employee ownership model he wanted to go with before he actually even started the transition process. And so that's really the first step, as you said, is spend the time, know the options, research, think about what's best for you. bounce ideas within your industry, off trusted peers, people who are advisors, and get kind of down to that, okay, what are my kind of top options here? And then you can start forming a more concrete plan, which then speaks to things like, okay, how are we going to communicate this? Or what legal documents do we need? Does our entity structure change, and how does that impact things like contracts, like Rick was just talking about? So, all of these things have to be thought through. And like I said, at least 3 years, because it can take that much time just to decide which option you want to go with. And then it can take another 3 to 5 years to actually implement the change. And if you do this right, you want to take time. It's not like selling shares of a public company that you have in your 401k or something. It really is important to everybody, from the owner on down to the person who just got hired 6 months ago, that this gets handled right. So that would be my kind of basic timeline of how this works.
And I'd add to that, that's not necessarily all the cash out. Like there's also a transition period for that part of the exit process too. Yeah, like I said, I think for us, I think it was about 15 years from inception to fully liquidating all of the original ownership pieces. I'd also say the different models are really important. The cash obligations, how much profit a company is. We're a construction company. We have single digit operating income, and we had a loss in 2018. Interesting, the loss in 2018 was shared. So we actually debited people's internal capital accounts as a share of the loss, the same that we share profit. And so that was really an interesting experience of feeling the risks, not just the benefits of ownership. But yeah, I'd agree, something like that. For us, we had built up a culture. The only other thing I'd say is there's a difference in the capital structure and the ownership culture. And so I think that during those 3 years of trying to figure out how to transition the capital piece, you could be doing things culturally to embrace democratic decision-making, open book management, engagement. There's other ways, and those things you can get retention now at this time in our culture and in our society, where retention is becoming a challenge or engagement's becoming a challenge. You could be working on those pieces while you try to figure out the capital stack and what the capital transition looks like. So kind of two different elements. Also, employee ownership doesn't mean you need to do anything different necessarily in the way you operate your business, and you could change the way you operate your business without changing a whole lot with the way it's capitalized. So two different kind of struggles, both philosophically aligned in the employee ownership model, but you could be working on either or both at the same time.
Yep. Well, I'm looking at the clock. I feel like I could go on with more questions, and I certainly can see that our audience has some more, but I don't want to take up too much of people's time. So I just wanted to sort of close with a closing thought, which is I've first of all learned a ton, and a couple of the things I've learned, if I could just take the liberty of distilling them, is one, I'm struck by how important culture is in all of this. And I love, Jason, what you said at the end here about, really taking this as an opportunity, even early days in the journey, to kind of build this type of engagement and sort of democracy into your engagement with employees. And I could definitely see that being a wonderful sort of benefit of this too. I think governance, and really thoughtful governance for the context of the company, the way it operates, the culture, and the needs of the company seems extremely important as well. And then the third piece is sort of, information and doing your homework, and really kind of tailoring an employee-owned model to the particulars of the company. So the last question I'm just going to ask, which I think I know the answer to, I'm looking at you, Allison, is will the slides be available after this? Yes, yeah, so we'll make the slides available to attendees for anyone who is looking for more information and material to go with this discussion. And with that on the nose, I'm just going to say thank you to our wonderful panelists. You all have been wonderful and shared a lot of information today, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be in this discussion with you all.
Yeah, and just before we close out, again, want to extend my thanks to the panelists and everyone who joined us today. And on behalf of Project Equity, that question about steps and process and timeline and different options, that's what we're here for. And we can help make it easier and faster to get to the answer of, what options exist for you, the ins and outs of the different approaches, how you can learn more. And the steps in the process start with just a consultation and a conversation. So we have it fairly easily on our website to sign up for a consultation. Please don't hesitate to reach out to either info@project-equity.org or me personally, ALISON@projectequity.org. And we will be sharing both the slides and the contact information about the panelists. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Can we do bonus material now? Seriously.
Sure. Go ahead, Rick.
What does that mean?
Whoever's editing can cut it
Is that
off.
the
with
blooper
just
reel
words.
or?
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
So I want to give a couple sound bites for the Silver Tsunami. Here at Optimax, we've done a couple things to encourage our workers with decades of experience to stick around a little longer. One of them is we came up with a 25th anniversary gift, and we give them a block of phantom stock options that vest over a 5-year period. And it's just a way to put a little giddy up in their step. And I sit down with each one when they get their gift, and I encourage them to leverage their experience, to share it with the younger employees, to try to help us grow the business faster, how to help us strengthen the organization. And to the extent that they can personally help make that happen, we'll grow faster. Their shares will be worth more on their 30th anniversary. The other thing that we're doing, and this really works well for some of the older folks, but I think it also works well for women that are dealing with having to take care of kids or other family members, is we created something we call a dream team, where they don't have set hours. They come in when they want. These are people that typically have decades of experience, and they're just really good at what they did. And some of them come in and they actually do work. Others, they just come in and they walk around and talk to some of the younger members of the team and give them advice on whatever they're working on. So that's just a really nice way to honor them and for them to give back a little bit.
That's fantastic.
But
I got some bonus.
sure.
Go for it. We can talk for hours. I mean, there's so much to talk about.
Well, we've been talking a little bit about how 16 years ago, our model worked really well for a startup company, and it created all these really engaged people that helped co-create our business, and people were really engaged writing our bylaws. And now we're 16 years old. We went through our first transition from original owners to the new model, and now we're 10 years from that transition. And one of the things we've realized in the realm of equity is that not everybody has the capital to buy, and depending on what the share price is, so how do we make it a more inclusive, diverse employee ownership experience? And that's our new challenge. And so we're talking now about, can you earn ownership versus have to buy ownership? And I don't think that works at the beginning, because you have to have capital. But now that we're 16 years old, what is the next generation, and how do you be generous, and how do you perpetuate the employee ownership experience in a more diverse and inclusive way? And that's our new challenge as an organization. As we mature, can we get to that more earn it instead of buy it, ownership mentality? And people are super invested in working at the company. We would hate for capital be the obstacle to ownership, to create wealth for a more diverse group of people in the world. So that's our new challenge as an employee-owned company that we're faced with.
Yeah, I've always thought of it where startups need investors and shareholders to get going, right? But once the business becomes a self-sustaining economic engine, that's the time to start thinking about buying out all those investors and getting them out of the way, and then getting serious about a succession plan, a long-term plan. Sam, you must see this quite a bit in your work.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to go back to something that Jason said earlier, is something that we talk about a lot, is the triple win, right? I mean, if you do these succession plans right, it should be a win for the outgoing owner, a win for the incoming owners, and a win for your customers. I mean, you can make this happen. And so I think that's really, really important when you're thinking through any type of succession plan. And the other piece of it, and Rick, you were talking about it, Jason, you mentioned it earlier, is this isn't like, hey, here's a check for $5 million, right? I mean, there's different structures to the way you buy out the owners, and that's an important component to the whole process too, is how does this look? Where does the capital come from? And is it, quite honestly, going to be sustainable for the business that we're running right now, which is why it can be easier once you're up and running, as you were saying, Rick, and more sustainable to do an actual buyout of those original owners, because now you're not saying, oh, geez, are we going to have to, we can't expand because we've got to pay owners A, B, and C.
And it's funny you say that too, Rick, about buying out capital, because Namaste Solar, part of our conversion to employee ownership, we actually allowed us to bring in external equity. And so we actually have a relatively large external investment pool. We pay a fixed dividend to. They're higher on the capital stack in any sort of liquidation event to help reduce risk for them. But we don't have the capital internally, to the point of it takes capital. We don't have the capital internally. Our owners don't create enough, but we have a 16-year-old business that people feel confident enough and invest in. And that was one of the other reasons we converted, was to allow for an external capital mechanism. So it's, people don't own their own houses, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cheap money in the world, and there's a lot of money that wants to do good things with it.
Right.
And it benefiting employees and being more equitable are things that investors would love to put their money in vehicles like that, as we divest from some of the things that might not be as healthy. So people love the fact that they can invest in a company like Namaste Solar, climate focused, employee focused, equity focused. So anyway, it doesn't mean you have to have all the equity either. It means that creates a structure and a vehicle for other investors to participate in your business.
Well, in your situation,
you guys. We could talk about this all day, and I know we've got folks. Who need to get on to their next adventure. So I want to thank you all for the engagement, and I certainly would love to stick around all day with this conversation. But I look forward to a next one.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hey, Allison, one thing is, if there are questions in the chat box that we didn't get to that you think we can help with, feel free to send them to us. We're happy to, send out answers if we have them.
Wonderful. Will do. Thank you all. This has been fantastic.
All right.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.